Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Randy Labonte, and I'm CEO of the Canadian E-Learning Network. And it's my pleasure to be here to share with Dr. Michael Canuel from Learn and the rest and all of you some ideas and suggestions, but bringing a perspective from across Canada as well as to some degree international. I've spent, many years as a teacher and as an administrator in the school system and have worked at the provincial level as well as now at the nonprofit level. For a number of years. It's a privilege to serve our network and the folks across Canada, including Learn and those in Quebec, as well as I teach online for teachers who are learning to teach online for Vancouver Island University, as well as contribute other professional learning opportunities. So it's a pleasure to be here and to share. Dr. Michael.
Thanks, Randy. Some of you already know me. If you don't, my name is Michael Canuel, and I'm the CEO of Learn. As you know, Learn has been offering online classes to our community since 1999. So we've been doing this for a while. I managed to get my doctorate in the field of e-learning as well. And since then, I've managed to follow, I'm not going to say lead, our virtual campus team and our pedagogical service team and the amazing things that they do. I also helped put together a program that is now running in Southeast Asia in over 5,000 schools. So we've had a little experience doing this kind of work in the online world. And I think about 8 years ago now, Randy, we started up the Canadian E-Learning Network. And maybe just a quick little story about that. We were in Indianapolis at a conference, a NACOL conference. It was an international conference, really all about online learning. And we were having a session about what's happening in Canada. And it struck us as a little ironic that we had to go to Indianapolis in the United States to find out what was going on in the rest of Canada. So from there, we decided that no, it didn't make any sense, and we had to create our own organization. And from there comes the Canadian E-Learning Network, and Learn's been a very proud partner of this organization from the outset. I also want to mention, as I look right now, 147 participants. When we started to put this together fairly quickly, about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, Randy and I were commenting and saying we'd probably only be two of us in this room talking to one another, but we'd record it and have at least something we could share with you. I'm really honestly blown away by the fact that we have so many people joining us on a Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock when it's beautiful and sunny outside. So I think it speaks volumes to our community and to the interest in the whole subject. Just so it's clear, today's workshop really is an introduction to online learning, and we're going to be talking just in addressing the building blocks. The following workshops that we have will start to go into greater depth, but I think at this time, we just felt that it was important that we situate you in this whole world of online learning. Randy?
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. And so we're coming to share as a foundation, but this is an initiative that will carry on through the next week and a half or so, and hopefully something that you can use and refer back to on an ongoing basis. And I think you'll hear about that from the rest of the Learn team as they move forward. But the pandemic has put us into an interesting situation. So the shift to online teaching and learning comes at varying levels for each of us in terms of our skill, our experience, our aptitude or desire to be doing this. So what we wanted to do is start with the foundational building blocks of online learning and give you a bit of an example. And I think I'm going to let Michael describe a little bit about what we thought of when we say schooling, when we say online. We have different models and conceptions that come to mind, and all of our models and conceptions are likely different. It's just in the same way that in education, we use a lot of jargon to describe something, but it may not be the same notion that each of us have in our head. So we wanted to start with a little bit about when we say schooling, what do we actually think of? So Michael, I'll let you take this from here.
Thanks, Randy. As Randy was just mentioning here, if we just take a step back and look at what we're trying to do.
Sorry.
As we look at what we're trying to do in our classrooms and in our online setting, I think we have to recognize that we're calling on our educators to do a lot more than simply transfer content, transfer information. Those of you who know me hear me repeat this quote often and often from Charles Dickens, who when he wrote Hard Times back in 1860-something, talked about teachers as being cannons loaded to the muzzle with facts, ready to blow the imagination out of the minds of children. Well, clearly we're looking at going well beyond that today. And I think that all of our teachers, our educators recognize that we want to do more than just fill them with content. We've got to do a whole lot more. So we're looking now at a reality that's changing, and we have many options. And I want to make clear as we go to the next one, thank you, Randy, for moving that forward, that when we talk about different ways of delivering our online classes, we use a lot of different terms, a lot of different expressions. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that not only are they all different, and in one way, but substantially, when done properly, they all have benefits and challenges. Very often we talk about online education as being the poor cousin to face-to-face, and that's not necessarily the case. I've used this example many times. For those of you who've heard it already, I beg your indulgence, but you know, we've all been in classes where the teacher lectures and bores the kids to death. The same thing is true when you're in an online environment. If you're just going to provide content, you're going to bore the kids. So we have scenarios right now where you have face-to-face, virtually no technology, and you can do a good job in there. You know, it's not because it has no technology that you're face-to-face, you know, that it's not good. It can be excellent. It was the Socratic method, for example, is an excellent example of that. But then as we go along, we have in the blended environment, combinations where we start to, we're face-to-face, but we're now combining it with various resources. There are so many different definitions. Again, I go back to a conference where I was at about 7-8 years ago, and we were trying to come up and limit it to blended learning to about 7 or 8 definitions. And I think by the time we were done, we were up to about 12. But essentially, it's just a combination of using face-to-face with a technology-supported learning. So it could be a computer in a classroom, you know, not even connected to the internet. It's a form of blended learning. It can be where you've broken up your class into groups, and you have one group working with a teacher in a remote area. So that's one form of blended, and really everything that comes in between all that fits into that category. And then obviously you have the fully online education where that's entirely dependent on technology. Now, one of the things I want to make clear is that in Quebec, you'll hear very often formation à distance. It's always driven me a little crazy because it always suggests, or in my mind, makes me think of correspondence courses, which are just like dreadful. And well, dreadful. They are useful for 5% of our learner profile. That's the independent, self-regulated learner. Most of the time, though, you know, that notion of remote teaching is just not that effective if you're doing in that particular context. So we have all of these different models of teaching and delivery that's available, that are available to us. Randy?
Thanks, Michael. Yes, and so one of the things when we talk about e-learning or online learning models, we're describing a whole array of different things that can occur. But again, with that conception back to the one-room schoolhouse, when we talk about online or e-learning, we often think of correspondence, which is where it grew from. So the early distance education days. But the models have evolved quite significantly, and there's some consistencies in here. If you've got a smartphone that if you want to scan the QR, you can go to this particular post, which Michael Barber, who does a lot of research in this area as well, and is actually on a Twitter chat with me tomorrow, can describe a little bit more in terms of this. But what's evolved in the model is not only is that there's a digital learning space and environment that is contributed to and there's exchange between and among students as well as teachers, but there's also a critical home-based or physical-based or school-based component which has support for the learners that is there and is active. And it's not necessarily the teacher that is that support individual or offering that. So what we've seen a lot of the programs in Canada that first started that were launched virtually completely at a distance, where the teachers are all housed in one central location. We're seeing a much more hybrid model where teachers are also in a classroom, in a school with some responsibilities, but they're interacting as well in that blended environment in the digital domain as well as in the physical domain. So I think it's really important that we consider some of those models. And the interesting thing is, okay, well, that kind of makes sense if I look at the model, but now what's the structure? How do I understand this? So what's interesting is that this is research that came out of Athabasca University. Garrison Anderson Archer started in 20 years ago. It still remains a very central model in the discussions around distance education, e-learning, online learning, in that sort of genre as well. And they clarified things that I think that apply in a classroom, or they apply in a totally distant situation, or they apply in blended learning. It's really pedagogy that's the critical piece here. And it talks specifically about presences. So a teaching presence. So when I'm in a classroom, I'm the teacher, I'm present. But also when I'm online, I'm a teacher and I need to be present. But it manifests differently. I no longer have the luxury of just having these faces and eyes staring at me. Okay, I have to manifest, I have to create interaction and be present in a much different way. But there's obviously the cognitive presence, where in that there's content, there's activities, there's things that are being done and are being set up to do. But there's also a social presence. So a lot of teachers who are first sort of moving into remote teaching are really concerned that they don't have body language, that they have no way of knowing exactly where students are at, or if they're listening, if they're making an impact. So we use virtual tools like this that we can actually do video, but they're not accessible necessarily to everyone. But social presence can also be shown and be found in communication exchange, in emails, in forum posts, in discussions, in the assignments themselves, in questions and back and comments that can happen. So social presence can be done. The question is, when we first think about teaching or remote teaching and being online, is let's find the content, let's send it out to the kids, and let's hope we get something back. And so I don't know about many of you, but if that has been your experience in remote teaching, it's something that we have to work towards, because we have to work hard on this domain. But it is a significant part of the learning experience online. Now, this research continues across internationally to be used, but what I like about this particular research, and if you go to the coi.athabascau.ca, you'll find that they have a survey. There's 34 questions. Now, when I was working with the folks in BC, we used those questions to frame the standards, but it was framed within this model and structure in order to understand it. And in teaching teachers who are moving into practice online, I find simple models and structures to be an important way to frame things, because it encompasses both our teaching, our design, and everything that we need to do in that online learning domain. So what's happened, and this is Tony Bates, another fellow that works in Canada. He works with Contact Nord, which is the post-secondary consortium in Ontario, is that triage has happened. And Tony is a good person to follow if you want to have a little bit more information. He's very good at communicating. Even though he came out of our post-secondary institutions, he doesn't talk that way. He's very clear in terms of his grounding in K-12, and I think that's helpful because his wife is a teacher in K-12. So I think that he's heard it a lot over the time. But this is not what you're hearing, what you're seeing, and you're experiencing is not online learning the way in which it can be done, and it evolves. And it's going to take time for us to get there, quite specifically for us to do that. So I'd like to just to stop for a moment there and maybe do a little poll of you in terms of what you think and what you've experienced for this. So the first question, and hopefully I'm going to do this right. Those three full questions. So I think we're doing them all at the same time. Yes, we are. So if you can just give an indication in terms of your confidence level, your experience, and whether you have a plan for September, because this is kind of like why we're here. So if you don't mind just filling that in, that would be appreciated. And it gives us a sense in terms of who you are, where you're at as well, because one of the things that Learn is doing as a group is moving towards helping to support what it is that you're doing specifically in your own practices. So it's nice to see that there's some folks that are confident that's coming in as well, somewhat prepared, possibly. The one thing that as you continue to fill that in, what I've learned quite quickly in my own experience, we all have our own COVID crisis, as I call it, and we've had our own challenges. But the one thing that did seem consistent across a number of people that I've talked with is that we can't long-term plan. We don't think about, I mean, I don't know if you've thought, you're probably thinking about July right now. September is a far off way. So that's one of the things that's there. So let's let me stop and just, we can take a look and see what we've gotten here. And I'll just stop sharing. Okay, no, I don't want to continue. Relaunching the poll will clear existing polling results. So we're seeing them? No, now we see them. No, I cleared them. Sorry, it's my first poll. I do apologize. Michael, comments?
Well, I think, Randy, clearly as we look at all this, we have teachers in our audience and participants today whom we know are already teaching, have been teaching online. A number of them are actually doing online and real-time teaching. As I say, they're in a classroom and they're working with students remotely. So they've already come across and understand a lot of the challenges involved in all this. Just as a quick anecdote, over the weekend, I met with a couple teachers and we were just chatting. And one of them was telling me that when she teaches at the CEGEP, how she hates teaching online with a passion. I said, well, what do you do? Well, she says, I prepare these video capsules and then I have a series of questions and I send the video out with the questions and they send them and they've got to answer me by the end of the week. And she says, this isn't teaching for me. She says, I hate doing this. I don't get to know my students. They're not motivated and so on and so forth. And then I had another teacher from Joliette who was telling me that she's been teaching online for the last month and a half, but out of the 140 or 150 students who are supposed to be there, she's only getting 2 or 3. So she was very demotivated by the whole experience. So what we're seeing is a mixed bag and in many cases, a lack of understanding that there can be so much more that's done. On the flip side, we had a blog last week where we saw one teacher in our community at grade 1 doing absolutely extraordinary things. So I think as our teachers come to see all this, there are lots of options and lots of possibilities. So that's why I look at the poll results. We see some 13%. And by the way, that's kind of incidentally the breakdown that we normally look at. And we see that our leaders and the early adopters of innovation, it usually runs around 15%. So it's not surprising to see numbers that reflect that as well, that those who are, well, ready and confident and they're prepared and they're ready to move forward. So that kind of distribution is normal, but not everyone is quite in that situation. Randy, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's the same thing. And what's important, there's a number of strategies and things that we're going to ask you about as well for how you can take what you currently are doing, the successes or the strengths that you have, and the consistencies that you've learned about what does work temporarily in this sort of remote teaching, and apply them in September. And I think it's important for us to think in terms of what are we actually going to be facing come September. So maybe Michael, you can talk a little bit to this about what is our new normal that we're going to see.
Well, here's the truth of the matter. I'm sitting on 2 committees right now within the ministry tied to really attempting to forecast what's coming up in September. And they're having a tough time doing this because here's some things that we do know for sure. We know for sure that there will be social distancing, that more than likely you won't be able to put 25, 30, 35 students into one classroom. What does that mean? Well, it means you'll be teaching smaller groups. More often, are you going to be teaching in the morning in one group and another group in the afternoon? Or is it going to be alternate days, alternate weeks? They're not quite sure about how that's going to play out. They might actually leave it to each school board to work out. Now, we're supposed to find a little bit more tomorrow about some of the conditions and terms that they're putting forward for the opening of the schools. But what they have described right now are 3 scenarios where they have them présentiel, that is to say you're actually in the school. Then it'll be some variation of in school and online. And then the 3rd scenario is fully online. Now, the irony is that at the ministry, and as they work on what they're calling their écosystème numérique, they're talking about présentiel, hybride, and then the third scenario, online, is they don't even call it the third scenario, dans le pire des cas. You know, so they've already decided this is the worst case scenario, which almost sets the tone for what's about to happen. I don't think it has to be that way, but clearly we're going to come across, it won't be business as usual, or at least I don't expect it will be business as usual. You can all come back and tell me you were wrong come September, but that's going to affect busing. It's going to affect homework. It's going to affect a whole variety of things. And I don't even want to get into this discussion about how it will affect workloads. I don't know how it will affect your collective agreement. I have no idea, and I don't want to go there, but certainly things will be different. And I think it could be, by the way, exciting. I think sometimes a little change is a healthy thing for us to do. So we're certainly looking at these 5 different options where the amount of mediated class teaching, mediated by technology teaching, will come into play. So that's a little bit of what we can anticipate coming forward. And based on that, I'd like to maybe now throw out a question to you. Randy, if you can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to hear from you. What are your concerns coming into September? And maybe it's not even a concern. If you want to frame it differently, we put it as a deficit kind of model. But what are you looking forward to in September, or what concerns you about September? So maybe if you could just in your chat, give us a few ideas of what are the concerns you have for September, and maybe we can start to address some of these things. So I'll ask our...
Would you like me to throw you a question, Michael?
Yeah, could you please?
Yeah, we have one here. I feel a little bit overwhelmed from Vicky about doing both remote and face-to-face. I put a lot of time and effort into one or the other, but both is overwhelming.
Yeah, and it's perfectly normal to be overwhelmed. And so you have to work out strategies for, I think a lot of it depends on what you're doing in the classroom, but clearly here we had one teacher who basically said, well, how do I set up the camera so that in the classroom that I can be teaching and the kids at home can watch me while I teach in the classroom? Well, that's certainly one model, but it suggests a certain passivity to it. So you have to look at how can I break it down so that I'm not doing the lecturing model, and maybe find ways of doing it. It's certainly a management thing, and you'll have to develop new skills, but no question, it's a scary time, and it's challenging. But the secret is, there's no big secret to it. It's honestly, it's a question of a lot of planning, and the more that you are online and the more it's hybrid, the more planning you have to do. My approach was always more is better, so that you never had them waiting on you, that you always had the students working ahead of you. Randy,
yeah, I'm going to come in and be a little bit of a contrarian there to that statement. I think that what concerns me the most about September for teachers is that they'll be expected to run online classes, courses, and exchange in communication with students, plus teach in the classroom, but expected to be doing this differently. So it's essentially doubling the load. I want to go back to the conception of what is school? Is school really going to be in a classroom if half your students half the time are not, half your students 3/4 of the time are not there? Is school really in that classroom? So I think it's a reconceptualization about what it is and where learning occurs. And I know that because it's so hard to predict, we would hope that all students would come back on a regular basis. But the reality that we have to plan for is it's likely not to happen. We want it to, but we better plan realistically now. So my thinking about this, and I said this to a number of others, and hopefully it's well received with all of you. I think you have to plan one classroom. And I think the only thing that can be consistent for students where you can exchange, share, build content, have assignments, communicate, let parents know what's going on is the digital classroom. It's the online component where you can track, record, manage that lesson activity, all of the assessments that you might have, how you communicate should be through that platform. What does that mean for when kids come to see you in your classroom? You support them. You do the social emotional. You ask them, how are you feeling? How are things going? How can I help? What do you need? What should I change? You can do that online as well. Not to say that you shouldn't be, but it's just that you then take advantage of the face-to-face environment in different ways. Just like how many of us have been itching, and some of us are now able to expand our bubble and have other people physically in with us. And we have a different connection when we're together. And it's important to enhance that. And we know from past experiences in terms of these other events that have happened globally, is that we always go back as humans to that social connection. So there will always be physical school. There will always be places where we teach and learn, where we share with children in a structured fashion. But I would argue there's always digital learning spaces now that will always be present, and the successful e-learning models that we have in the research say they continue to go forward. Sorry, long-winded answer to a short question.
Are there any other
What other concerns?
What else are we coming up with?
Oh, goodness gracious. I think too many to entertain at this moment. So we will continue to feed these into the document.
Mm-hmm.
I can, if you'd like us to pull one out, we can.
That's fine. I don't think so. I think that a lot of the concerns, and people have probably seen it go by in the text chat. So it's not so much what concerns you, it's more about what, which is what we're here to say, is what do we think it's going to look like? And now the next most important question is, how do you avoid feeling like this? Okay. How do we get out of emergency remote teaching where we just barely survived? Kids were told they got a pass in some cases across the country. They just backed off. But I was talking actually with folks in the Cree School Board. They actually right now have got about a 60 to 70% engagement with their learners. But the norm has been about 30% engagement is what I've seen across the country in emergency remote teaching. So how do we up that game in all cases? And each of you know probably your own connections with students in this situation. So really the next question is, what are you going to do about it? We're going to go back to School Street. We don't know what it's going to look like. We have no idea if it's what the model will be, but what can you do right now that's within your own reach and grasp? Because some of you said you're somewhat prepared and thinking about it. So there must be some really good ideas. The room is always smarter than one or two of us online talking.
Yeah. So those of you with the 14%, I believe, who said you were very ready, how are you going to approach this? And those of you who are not ready but want to be ready, what are you going to do? How are you going to address all this? It's certainly there's no question it's a challenge. And I'd like to build on what Randy was saying, because I don't think it was necessarily contrarian. I think no matter what, this is going to require a great deal of planning and organizing. Yeah. It's a new environment. For some, it's scary. And then in addition to everything else, and just an important point about the technology is, yes, get to know it at least on a rudimentary level. And the more you use it, the more you'll become comfortable with it. Don't overly stress needlessly over the use of the technology. That will come with time. Our online teachers are outstanding in the variety of devices and technologies and apps that they use. But that didn't happen overnight either. So be patient, be forgiving of yourself as well in all of this.
And I think that's one other bit of advice to me is watching some of them go through. Equity is certainly an important issue, but also I've observed during the remote teaching that has gone on, particularly, and not so much because my children are in school, but now I'm watching my children's children in school and their experiences. And I hear a lot about the content that got thrown up without explanation, and then an assignment that was supposed to be in, and I don't know what to do. I've also heard about that there was a live session that I'm supposed to go to. The teacher goes blah, 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 blah. And, one of my grandsons spins in his chair in front of the screen he's supposed to be watching, totally disengaged. I've also seen some situations where teachers have created inquiry projects for students to do in their own home or in their own community where they're allowed to be outdoors back in the early times, etc. And they came back into live sessions to share. They had document areas where they were sharing. So, but the most important thing for students is to not go off over the ledge by choosing the next best tool because I know how to use it, or I heard it's really good, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, because you have to think in terms of the environment. So the parents are there, and if we're doing that remote teaching, the parents have to deal with these kids. I have heard stories from parents that are saying they've had to learn 10 different applications for their kids because each teacher is doing something different. And then the accessibility or availability of that particular tool is problematic. So again, we have to come back and look at it from a pedagogical perspective. First and foremost, the tools only are there to support the pedagogy, not to define it. So I think it's really, really important that you use the simplest tool of all. But also, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of tools out there that are created in the same manner that we have free apps to use available. The problem is if it's free, we are the market. We are the data that is being mined. So privacy for students is very, very important. So some consistency in terms of tools and technologies that are being used is critical, but also ones that are managed and supported through the boards, the districts in your own schools, and to be consistent with them. So like a teacher, I mean, I'd love to use this. This is my favorite tool. I might not be able to use it. And I need to get over that so that there's some consistency for all of us.
Randy, as I look at some of the comments in the chat, I think that one of the things that does come through is that teachers are going to have to work together like they've never worked before. There has been no shortage of PD, and here we are adding to it, I understand. What I'm hoping is that we're also taking a step back and looking at all this right now. What works for you, what works, and put together and work with teams, with your colleagues. There will be outside resources, and your board and your consultants will be there for sure to support you. But you're going to have to build teams. And we talked about communities of practice in the past. I think more than ever, you're going to have to look at developing these teams and finding maybe people who have different areas of expertise that you can call on. It's certainly a challenge. And people are saying, well, what are we going to have going forward? I mean, what's going to happen in September? We should have a slightly better idea in the next week or two. But to be honest with you, as you all know, things change so quickly. It's such a fluid environment that you're just going to have to be flexible in a way that you've never been before. And you're going to hopefully everyone will be there to support you. That's part of our objective here as well, is to start to, as I said, we're giving some building blocks, but in the coming workshops, we'll be going into greater depth and answering some of those instructional questions, strategies, and so on and so forth. But yeah.
I want to say the room is so much smarter. I'm seeing such great suggestions go by in the chat as well. I'm really looking forward to the curated document at the end so that I can take more time to look through what the ideas and suggestions are. But the other thing I think that's consistent in the research around successful online programs in both the literature, but also I've had the privilege of going to see a number of different schools and programs in operation, is the fact that it takes a team. The collaboration between and among teachers who are working online is absolutely critical, but it's also inspiring. So I think it is that we need to lean on each other, but also to lean on those like Learn that have the opportunity to maybe share some of the experiences, which is what this workshop is about as well. So do we want to lead into the next question, Michael, at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just pop it up very briefly. Here, so back on School Street, what do you need help with? Because some of you came in and you had some degree of confidence, you've had some degree of experience. I see Google Classroom combined with Zoom going by. I've had an ability to connect to these kids, etc. But now how do we go the next step to actually offering a full curricular experience for our students in what may possibly be a scenario that goes from most of next year where they're not physically all in the same space at the same time.
Mhm.
What is it specifically that would help you?
While we're waiting for some of the answers, I see that people are already throwing out ideas and suggestions as to what they've done. Virtual field trips, obviously, positive. We've had sessions on bird watching, on mental wellness. We've done a whole variety of things. Recently, we had one on Français langue seconde where we had 100 participants doing this. So there's a lot of need out there. But as I said, I maintain, it's exciting, and there are a lot of resources in there. But at this point, what will you need help with specifically? Because the other part of all this is I will be relaying a lot of this information back to the ministry and to the school boards, to our board of directors made up of DGs.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on something that Robin, I just saw it go by. I'm sorry, I'm not showing any selection bias. It just happened to be right there in my eyesight. But using Zoom and now going into Teams. So what I've seen and observed with teachers that are playing around with MS365, and we've been experienced and had much time working in Google Classroom and working with Google tools, but MS365 is coming on pretty strong. I've seen them move and change and adapt things just in the past few months. So the Microsoft Teams chat or video selection is one that now has gallery view. Google just announced for Google Meet that they're going to launch gallery view. So while Zoom was out there, what tends to happen in tools is there's alignment around the technologies. The first LMSs were quite different, the learning management systems, but there's some consolidation. So right now, one of the teachers I'm working with in the course I'm teaching online, she in March built a course in Moodle for the first time that she'd ever used Moodle. And then in my course, she built another unit in Canvas, a different learning management system that she'd never used before, but she found that she could understand the differences, but had enough skill set because of the consistency in there. So when we talk about the environment, I think it's really important that we stay within what district tool sets are there so that we're not wandering too far away and building inconsistencies among our teams, our groups that work together, and not creating a scenario where both students and parents have to learn and understand a whole bunch of different technology, because then they'll just go, I'm done, over.
Randy, if I can jump in here, one of the questions really seems to be a recurring theme is, what about evaluation? How are we going to grade them? Where are the marks come from? There are a few things I have to mention to you. Is that if you're looking at, well, the kids cheat because they're doing it online and you're doing this summative type of assessment, research has shown, and actually we recommissioned Candy Learn a few years ago to look into this, and the research is pretty clear. You don't cheat more or less if you're doing it online. It just works out to about the same thing. But more importantly, if you're looking at assessment and an assessment / evaluation, and you're looking at doing it in a summative format, I might suggest to you that you look at doing it more in the portfolio as they're working on projects. Ask for artifacts, steps, look at the work that they're doing, provide feedback quickly, regularly for them, but build up that portfolio that really allows you to see the progression in the learning of the student, rather than trying to give them, well, here's a test at the end of the week where you've got 10 multiple choice questions and let's see how you do. I mean, you can do that as well, but I suggest to you that you use the online environment as a place where you can develop and house a digital portfolio for your students, and use the artifacts. There's nothing more effective than formative assessment, an assessment that's done in a short period of time. And online really provides you with that opportunity, an opportunity that sometimes in a regular classroom you don't have a chance to do.
I want to comment on a couple of other things that have gone by. Teachers are going to cheat. Teachers that I've talked to over the years know their kids. They have authenticity. They can look at a piece of product that a student might have provided to them, and they go, no, you didn't write that. Don't tell me you wrote it. And I remember that in my days as well. You could understand the voice of the particular students, But the other part of the assessment is, what are we assessing? If it's information that's easily accessible on the internet, why would we be that way? Why would that be our assessment? Essentially, what we're testing there is their skills in searching for that information and finding it. Maybe that is what we want to test. So I think we have to ask assessment to be something a little bit different, but also that it has the opportunity for reflection. I think that's a critical part when we're working online, is the ability to reflect on our own learning and doing that on a more regular basis, which is part of looking at competencies and skill sets and what I have been able to accomplish and assessing that. Well, how would I assess skills for students at a distance? Well, I would have them demonstrate them to me. They could create a little video. They could send it through. Or it's something we could do in a live session, or it could be a project-based piece that I would have them go and create and do, that then I would be looking not at what they produced, but what they had to do in terms of process skill building in order to accomplish that. So I think it's just a little bit of a shift around pedagogy as well. I think it's important in assessment, but it is a critical driver. There is no doubt about it. And sometimes a good preparatory kind of quiz around that notion of terms of less summative and more formative, I think is also very helpful for digital tools, because then you can reuse them.
Yeah, and Randy, there are three quick questions I just want to answer here. One was about children on the autism spectrum. As you understand, autism is one of those things very, very hard to define and describe. In some cases, we've actually seen research that shows where students put into an environment where they're just focusing on what's happening online, it's actually worked very well for them, and there's a more of a one-on-one, less distracting kind of environment. On the other hand, in some cases, it just hasn't worked. I mean, it's really hard to define. No question that when you're dealing with children with special needs like this, there will be greater challenges, and you're going to have to address it really on a pretty much you would do in a regular classroom anyway, in an ad hoc position. The other thing I just wanted to mention, what are the long-term effects of working online or screen? Well, clearly there are a number of things you have to consider. First of all, if you are actively engaged in what's going on the screen, it's not the same as if you're watching television or watching a movie in a passive. Your brain reacts differently. Everything's different. It's not the same thing at all. So we have to be careful. The other thing, obviously, is you don't want children sitting in front of a screen for hours on end. So someone will say, well, how long should an online class last? Well, if it's 45, 50 minutes, you reached about the upper limit of where you should be, depending again on your class and the age. And the other thing too is don't get them have them sitting there all the time. Learn to take breaks, at strategic moments, but and it really has to be planned. It can't be too accidental. So you can't be talking all the time like I'm doing right now. You've got to really give them an opportunity to react, stand, move. And it doesn't matter the age, typically I would have said by now, stand up, move around, because it's not healthy. We've been sitting for 45, 46 minutes. It's not a good thing. You should be standing, moving around. It's okay.
Can I stand up now?
You can stand up, absolutely. And the last thing I just want to mention, because someone asked, well, are there examples of good online teaching? There are many, many good examples of what good online teaching is. I'm just going to throw a little comment out. Last week we had a Twitter chat where we had our teachers and students online, and our online students spoke about their experiences here online, and they were asked, well, did you lose out on anything? Did you feel that you missed anything? And the answer was absolutely not. And they couldn't have been more enthusiastic about the whole experience. That's because our online teachers really have been doing this for a long time, and they know. I have to be careful. I say a long time, then they think, kind of says they're old. No, they're young and experienced, dynamic, young at heart, whatever. But yeah, there are good examples of this, and I'm not just saying at Learn, but there are many, many good examples, and we'll be posting videos tied to that. But I'm going to encourage you to come out and follow the next couple modules, because you will be seeing some of these teachers talking about strategies in the online environment.
And I think that to some of the questions around time and how much time should be spent, Zoom fatigue, you know, you start to hear some of those kind of comments, etc. I think like everyone else, we found our balance in terms of what would work for us in our own classrooms. So just think of the online as your own classroom, but the students themselves will give you the feedback if you're engaging with them. And I think it's really important to do that. I just want to go sort of into a bit of a last question, just looking at the time and wanting to make sure we have a little time for talking about the next modules. So as much as we talk about how do I engage and how do I teach and how do I do things, how many of you had a similar experience as this in your teacher preparation? Because is this really good pedagogy? Is this really good learning? This was transmission model types of things. And I think when you start to think about what's in the online environment, you have to think about the theater of voices and people out there is really one individual. As much as before we're broadcasting, which is why we gather people together in school, which is one to many. Okay, it was easier for us as teachers, but in the online, we really have to make a connection with each individual. And that takes different strategies and different cadences and different pace and different ways. It is likely at first to be more work for you until you have some ways and means that you learn as to how you can work with students and also find some economies of scale. But the first time going out, it's going to be daunting, as you've already experienced and can be. So it's important as well that we get past the whole issue around cheating and content and getting, how do we transition out of information into allowing more inquiry-based, more you know, creativity in terms of what we're asking students to do in a way that they can then manifest or show that back to us. And that may take more than just paper and pencil assignments in order to do that. So those are some interesting questions around, essentially, if you think back to the community of inquiry model, is it how do we create presences both as a teacher in terms of the activities we want them to do cognitively, but as well within the social structures that we can create online? Is it how can we actually engage? And if we think about the pedagogy and moving forward, that will drive how we structure things, how much time we want to plan for students, and what tools that we use best to connect with them. And if we're using a tool that they can't use in their own area, that's not good. We started with slate and chalkboards, well, actually drawing in sand, slate and chalkboards in order to communicate ideas. But you have to think in terms of the environment that when that was communicated, it was a social, conversational environment. A lot of our history has been oral, particularly in with our Aboriginal and First Nations groups. It's an oral history. How do we bring all of those components into this different environment? And it's not going to be a switch you're going to turn on overnight. It's something we're going to have to work with. But some thoughts before we look to close, because we've got about 9 minutes according to what my clock is saying.
Yeah, Randy, I'd like to just maybe throw in something because there are a number of questions that came by. And I just wanted to mention that if you're at the high school, at the elementary school level, one of the recommendations that is being made is that you look at looping. That is to say, if it can be set up that the students that you had in this school year stay with you and transition with you into the next school year, that's an ideal situation, especially if it's, some of it's going to be online. It just minimizes some of the stress for students. There's a sense of familiarity and comfort there. I know sometimes some teachers might say, I don't want to have little Johnny again. But as a rule, it's a good idea to be able to do this. The other part of this, someone mentioned, well, they don't have the physical presence, and there's no question about it. My son always says, yeah, Dad, you and your online learning, yeah. But, you know, the guys can't hold the girl's hand, you know, online. And that's fair enough. You know, obviously, we can't think of these things as a panacea. There is no one perfect solution. But as we look at all this, and Randy mentioned earlier, I think the digital environment offers a lot. And if we're into a blended environment, there are different opportunities that present themselves there. Sorry, Randy, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Let's go back to our moderators. Is there any burning question that passed by, or are you seeing consistently that maybe we should address while we're still live here?
Well, I think that we have some primary specialists here, early primary, and that's really, I mean, I'm just suggesting those learners are concerned because the parents need to be involved and implicated always. And how is that going to happen in this new reality? That's one of the questions. I'm not sure we can answer that today, Randy, but it's just something
Mm-hmm.
that's coming up, and I just don't want to not acknowledge the elementary voice here, especially early elementary. But that's something that has been a question over and over again throughout the chat. Early elementary learners, primary learners.
And again, I suggest in answer to that, a partial answer, go and look at the blog and see what one of our guests had to say about teaching grade 1 students. There's no question it's a challenge. I mean, but it can be done. And the parents have to play a role. There's just, I mean, you can't leave a 6, 7-year-old alone in the classroom, online, and expect them to do everything by themselves. So there has to be some parental guidance, support, and oh my God, what's going to happen if the parents are back to work, and the kids can't be there? Will they be taking these online classes from daycare, or I don't know.
Or from Auntie's house.
From Auntie's house, yeah. It's a really, really, really tough. One quick question: when I teach online, I notice that not everyone has access to a computer. Often there's a lot of distraction, noise, and other similar. Okay, here, that's absolutely true. You want to have an environment that's suitable for, but just to show you how research is interesting, there's different opinions on noise and distractions. One of the things they say is that it's good to have noise and distractions all around you because it really forces a focus on what's going on in front of you. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, but that's one perspective on all of this. Yeah, elementary plus Sesame Street, one of the best learning programs. Of course, and you look at what Sesame Street does. They've got them singing along, dancing, moving, repeating. They're doing all the things that kids normally do.
There's another comment that flashed by that I thought was really important to bring back, is that there's a feeling of, oh my God, I'm not alone. I was feeling really anxious about what I was able to do and not do, and what to go and where to turn for September. But being in this session made me feel connected to others, that I'm not alone in this enterprise and in my concerns. And I think that's a really important part, that we need to turn back to each other as professionals and share very much, and not be that classroom door that closes and I isolate myself from everyone else around me and just deal with the kids that are in front of me. I tried that. I was set up as a math science teacher in secondary, and then I moved in community, and the only job I could get was a temporary part-time teaching in an elementary school. Well, needless to say, I had to throw out curriculum, because I always thought about teaching content and curriculum and structure the lessons. And here we're going to do math at this time, then we're doing reading, and we're going to do, it didn't work. And I just about quit teaching. But unfortunately, I came back because I learned actually how to address individual needs, to use different strategies, to not necessarily teach everyone at the same time, the same way, the same thing, started doing groupings and all of that kind of thing. So when you go online, how you're going to do that is not always going to be simple. So the first default is to go and just do a curriculum, shove content. But think about how you might be able to create and just do one thing. And just one thing is all you need to do in September that was different from what you experienced through this spring and going into summer. Think about that. One thing that you can do differently. And if you start doing that and you build some success, you go, what's the second thing that I might do differently? So I think the next set of series that are going to be coming up will help you with maybe thinking about what's the one thing, but also as Michael has indicated and what Learn has created is a whole set of resources, materials. I mean, there's going to be a wealth of information in this Google Doc that has been curated with your own voice, again, the room. So look to your colleagues, look to the room, look for some help within that and some ideas, but make a professional commitment to do one thing different and add to, because every teacher that I've worked with who has done that has gone further, feels better, and feels they're connecting with students much, much better.
Mm-hmm. And again, the last comment is, again, it is not about technology. I see a comment down here. I'm very comfortable with the technology. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with teaching online. And once again, what you have to do is just think it through, look at all the different ways that you can be engaging your learner. Randy presented a little bit of the community of inquiry and how you can really look to engage them in a variety of ways. But sound pedagogy in a classroom, if you're good in the regular face-to-face classroom, ask yourself what's working there and then bring it to the online world. Yes, you have to adapt it a little bit, but it's the same thing. You have to engage them. You have to let them do things. One more comment is that if you're teaching at the elementary level, the schools that we have in Thailand and in the south of Asia, the kids are basically, they're in a regular classroom. There's a remote teacher who's working with them on the speaking and listening drills. The other classroom teachers working with them on the reading and writing, and they rotate to their workstations. And at each workstation, sometimes they have manipulatives, blocks and so on and so forth. Another one, they've got a workbook. It's all a question of planning and organizing, but it can be done, and it's done with success. We're running out of time. I know there were a lot of very, very specific classroom questions, and we just wanted today to touch some of the building blocks to reassure you that this can be done. It can be done well. It's not easy. There are challenges, but it can be done well. We've got lots of examples to support you in all this. Going forward, on Wednesday, we have our next workshop called Moving Forward, Encouraging Online Communication and Connections with Staff and Students. And I think that really will address a number of questions that you have. And then a week from today, I think, on the 22nd, yes. We have Transitioning Your Classroom Online, Tools, Tips, and Tricks. So the idea right now is that at the end of these 3 workshops, you'll have, if you don't already have it, a number of you do, you'll have maybe a greater sense of confidence that you can do this. There are a lot of ideas, and these will be recorded, and you'll be able to go back to them at any time. Moreover, a lot of the questions you've put here, we will be addressing going forward if we haven't already or haven't integrated them into the workshops coming up. Randy, that's about all I had.
That's a wrap. So you can feel free to reach out to either of us individually as well at any of that. I'm looking forward to going back. Really appreciate the comments, etc. Anything else, Learn team, that you want to add in?
We will be sending out a link to the recordings, so you can share them with your colleagues if you'd like. And I'd like to thank Randy and Michael Canuel for hosting the session, and thank you all for your participation. We'll be sharing the links to the resources too. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Good luck.